So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Sandra Brown. She's the author of over 70 novels. I think 60 of them have been on bestsellers lists.
67. Who's counting?
We have a lot of authors in the store that we are really proud of, but I personally am much more excited about Sandra. I was a latecomer to her books. I started with Lethal, but I've been getting through her backlist as quickly as I possibly can. I was up half the night trying to finish Friction and didn't quite, but if you haven't read it yet, it is fantastic, as I expect from her. So we're just very pleased to present to you Sandra Brown.
Yay!
I hope all of you can hear me. I am not going to use the microphone unless I absolutely have to. Can y'all hear me? Okay. I'm pretty good at projection, so if you can't hear me, we'll wave. I'm so happy to be here. When I was first invited, I went online, I investigated the bookstore, and I saw all the authors that they have hosted here, and I was really flattered to have even been asked to come. And then for all of you to show up today, and I see it's raining. I got here just I agree. I'm in Dallas, Fort Worth area, so we needed it even worse than you. But thank you all for coming out today. And I thought I'd just talk to you for a few minutes and then take your questions, because I want to talk about what you want to hear. And there's nothing more boring than a talking head. So I frequently am asked, and Anna was saying that she's a latecomer to reading Sandra Brown. But then I met another lady who said, I think I've read everything you've ever written. And that goes to 77 books. Friction is number 77. So, yeah, I've been at it a long time, over 30 years. And really, I started in this region because, I don't know if you know the story, and if I'm repeating myself, forgive me. But people ask, how did you get started? Because it's unlike another career where you hang out a shingle and all of a sudden you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're something. You don't just say, I'm a writer, and it's the truth, and so I got started when I got fired from my job. I was working on the ABC affiliate in Dallas, and on a show called PM Magazine, which all of you are too young to remember. But you do. And one day they came through and they fired all of us on the show because they needed fresh faces. So, which implied that mine wasn't fresh enough. And, so I had 2 babies at home. I had a husband whom I love. I just celebrated my 47th wedding anniversary. And I was like, but looking around going, this is not the sum total of my life. While those jobs and my family were so meaningful to me, I felt like there's more I need to be doing. What can I do? And God bless Michael, he said, well, you've always said you wanted to write, and now you've got time and opportunity. It's something you can do at home without having to pay for childcare. So either start doing it or stop talking about it. And he really kind of put it in the form of a dare. And so I set up a card table and a typewriter, if you remember those, and a ream of paper and a bottle of liquid paper, and I started writing my stories. All my life, I had been a reader, and before I could read, my mother told my sisters and me, I have 4 younger sisters. She read to us, she told us stories. My father was an editorial writer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So I think a little bit of Daddy's talent for putting words on paper, and Mother was such a romantic. She loved fairy tales, she loved storytelling. So I think those 2 gene pools merged in me. I didn't know that I could do it. I just knew that I really wanted to. I just had a fire in my belly for it. And so I set about writing down stories that have been going through my head for years, because I'm a career daydreamer. Always have been. A playwright, play like this, make believe that, making up characters and scenarios in my head. I had imaginary friends when I was growing up that I would talk to. Mother would say, "Who are you talking to?" "Well, Charlotte." Just sitting right there. Anyway, so I started writing stories, and I had written for about a year when a published author who had been on my husband's television talk show promoting her book. She was from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he said, "She owes me a favor, so why don't you call her and ask her what you do now, how you get started." So she said, "You need to go down to a writing conference in Houston, University of Houston with me." And I said, "Oh no, I don't belong there because I'm not a real writer. I'm just starting. She said, no, you have to go. There's going to be a lot of people there, agents, editors," and those words just sent shivers down my spine. I thought, there are real people that are agents and editors. I mean, that just seems so foreign. But I came and learned a lot, met a lot of people. While I was there, I met a woman who lives in Lufkin, and she has a bookstore that was similar to this in that she sold new and used, but she did such a phenomenal business in Lufkin, Texas, that every editor in New York knew her. They used to send her advance copies of all the books. So I was stumbling around, blah, 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 I'm Sandra Brown, and immediately apologizing because I don't really belong here. I haven't published and everything. And she said, "Well, what are you writing?" And I kind of described it. She said, "Well, when you get a manuscript that you're comfortable with, send it to me. I'll read it and I'll give you an honest evaluation." She said, "I've read everything ever written."
That's quite funny.
And I've been a school librarian before the bookstore, and I'll tell you whether or not it's any good because I'll know. So a few months later, I polished up a manuscript, and I called her and I said, "Do you remember meeting me in Houston, and you offered to read my book?" "Yes, I do." So I sent it to her, and she called me a few days later, and she said, "You need to send this to an editor named Vivian Stevens, who is starting a line for Dell called Ecstasy." And I said, "Well, I want to be a part of that." So I sent my manuscript to Miss Stevens, and Mary Lynn Baxter had called ahead and told her to be watching for it. The editor bought my book. She said, "Do you have anything else?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I finished one in the meantime. Send it to me." I did. She called me 13 days later and bought that one. So I sold my first 2 books in 13 days.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's not very often that I get to thank Mary Lynn in person, but she's here with me today. I owe her a debt of gratitude I could never, ever, ever. And we have been best friends, all these 35 years later. And so when I knew I was coming to Katy, I said, "That's kind of down south somewhere, isn't it?" So she drove down to be with her today. So I'm happy for the opportunity to get to thank her in person. I was well on my way. I started writing romances under several different pseudonyms for different publishers. Before you ask me why I would write under so many names, it was because at one time I was writing for 4 publishers simultaneously. And it'd be like, okay, who do I owe a book to? Right, I owe them a book. And because I'd have a contract for 3 or 4 at a time. And in one year, I think it was if you can remember back this far, 1983, I had 10 books published that year. So people had started asking me to write, and I finally decided that I was just going to be Sandra Brown. I had written under Aaron St. Clair, I'd written under Laura Jordan, and my first pen name was Rachel Ryan, under which I wrote the Ecstasy books, and that was a bribe to my kids, Rachel and Ryan. If you'll be quiet, leave mommy alone till the big hand gets on the 12, and the little hand then we'll go swimming, we'll go on a picnic, we'll do something, and I'll put your name on every page of the book. It didn't look like a book to them. It was just a stack of paper. It didn't have a cover and anything, but they were really proud when the first book came out and their name was on the cover. But after a while, I started writing under Sandra Brown because Michael was, I was kind of narrowing more down into crossover books and the mystery suspense, and I wanted to build my real name, my own name, in that genre. And Michael was enjoying spending the night with a different woman every night. What do I call you tonight? I said, all right, we're not doing that. I remember the first book tour I went on, and I was at a mall store when we used to have those, and they had I arrived and they had a table set up with all the books stacked up and flowers and a plate of cookies and because I was writing romances, a feather pen, like that's what I used, but they had gone all out. Nobody came.
Oh, no.
Not one single person until 2 hours I was scheduled to be there. And so I was counting it down. It was like T-minus 5 minutes. I am out of here. And saw a lady come out of the Dillard store. And she spotted me and her eyes lit up. She marched over there to the table and said, "How much are the cookies?" I said, "Help yourself." But I got a little better well known after time, and again in the mall near the store, and by this time Ryan was about 16, I guess, and there was a man standing at the book rack, and he was looking at my book. It's always a little awkward. You never know whether to say anything or not. And I'll go back to that story. One time I was in the beauty shop, and this lady was under the hairdryer, and she was sitting there reading my book, and I tapped on the dryer. And she looked at me and said, "You're reading my book." She said, "It is not. It's not." I'm a little gun shy. And I was on a panel in New York a few weeks ago with Clive Cussler. And darling man, he and I went to Afghanistan together on the USO tour. But so we know each other really well, and there were several of us. And so someone was saying, "What are your funniest stories from, And he said, he went up to this lady one time, he was reading one of his books, and he said, "When I first started writing, I thought how cool that would be, to be out in public and see somebody reading your book." And he said, "So I thought, all my life I dreamed about that." So he said, the first time I ever did it, I went up and I said, "You're reading my book." And she said, "What are you, some kind of asshole?" Stop asking for it. You never know what you're going to get. So anyway, Ryan and I were trucking it through the mall, and there was this man reading my book, and Ryan says, "Mom, go up to him." And I was like, I don't know. Oh, come on, it'll be cool. So I thought, well, it's got to be cool. So I sidled up to this man, and I said, "That is a really good book." He said, "Oh, you've read it?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I wrote it." He said, "You're Sandra Brown?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I was thinking about buying it for my wife for her birthday. If I bought it, would you sign it?" Be delighted to. So he went in and he paid for his book, came back, what's her name? Alice. "Dear Alice, happy birthday." Signed my name, dated it, handed it to him. Same time, son Ryan steps forward with a copy of the firm and says, "I'm John Grisham." I could have killed him.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
Yes,
I'll
well,
talk
thank
to you a little bit about two books about Main Street. Thank you for putting it #1 on the New York Times paperback list this week. Thank you. And I was writing another book last year, and anyway, when I was writing, I had 250 pages of another story, which is about 2 months worth of work. And one night I was sitting at home in my chair, my Edith and Archie chairs that Michael and I have, watching TV, and all of a sudden this scene came to my mind. And it was this woman on this mountain path, and something terrible happens, and I didn't even know what it was. And then she wakes up in this isolated cabin with this very mysterious, tall, dark, handsome stranger, frightened. And I got that. It's just, it's an effervescence. It's a bubbly feeling in my gut that's, I was so excited all of a sudden, and I was like, who are they? Who is she? What happened to her? Is he responsible? Is he a bad guy, good guy? You know, and I was just, all these questions just started going through my mind. And I thought, if I want to know, a reader would want to know. So the next morning when I got up and went to work, I sat down at my computer and I opened up the 250 pages that I had on another story. And I thought, you know, I'm just going to go with that other thing and see what happens. And I started that day and I did not stop till I had finished Main Street.
Oh, that was so good.
And it has been one of the most commercially successful books that I've done. And kind of a fan favorite. I see some of you nodding. But it just came out of my head. And the most difficult question to answer is, where do you get your ideas? Because the honest truth is, most of the time, I have no clue. It can start with character, as it did in Friction, which I'll talk about in a minute. Sometimes it's like another book that started with character was Lucky Tyler for the Texas trilogy. And I owed a book to some editor and for Bantam. And I was sitting there, I had nothing, blank wall. It was one of those days where you're just like, I should have become a dentist. I knew it. And all of a sudden, I saw this guy sitting in a honky-tonk in East Texas with his cowboy boot heels hooked around the bar stool round, staring into his beer, moody, in a bad mood, and thinking there was going to be trouble and hell. He just wasn't in the mood for it. And that's where Lucky Tyler came from. And I thought, I love this guy. What's going on? And of course, he's a lightning rod for trouble. So the fist fight breaks out. In walks his older brother. I didn't know he had a brother. And in the middle of the barroom brawl, here comes Chase, and I went, whoa, he's almost, if not better, than Lucky. And so that's where that trilogy came from. So I called the editor again, all excited, and I said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to write about two brothers, give each his book. I want to make the books a little bit longer than the Love Sweps, because that's what I was writing for her at the time. And I want to write the books from the male point of view. And she said, oh, you can't do that. And I went, well, you kind of can. Yeah, you can. I said, they're such great characters. They're thinking such great thoughts. She said, Sandra, people don't write romances from the male point of view. Now, remember, this goes back a long time. And I said, I want to do it. And if you'll grant me permission, I'll throw in another one. I'll give them a bratty baby sister. We'll make it a trilogy. And that's where the trilogy came from. But it started with that, seeing that character in my head and what he was doing and where he was. Have no idea where it came from. Similarly, friction. I'm a Texan born and bred, as you may can tell, and I have always had this romance going with the Texas Rangers. I mean, they're just studs. And so I started doing research on the Texas Rangers after. You remember it was a Texas Ranger that arrested the man later convicted of shooting Chris Kyle, the American sniper. Okay, well, this all happened just not too far from where I live. And Burleson or somewhere down, Cleveland. And so I saw on the news the Texas Rangers arresting him. They were questioning him. And guess what? They didn't have on cowboy hats. They had on ball caps and blue jeans and t-shirts. They're still studs. And so I started doing research into the history and everything, and the lore that surrounds them is just so Texas. So I thought, I'll do a story about a contemporary Texas Ranger. And they are only, I found this out through my research, 181 of them. And in a state with 254 counties, 700,000 square miles, they're spread pretty thin. But they're still, they have autonomy, they have statewide jurisdiction, they can initiate an investigation without invitation. They can join an investigation without invitation on a local, state, or federal level. I mean, they're still pretty smart guys. So I thought, okay, I've got this character, and Crawford started taking shape in my mind. And I thought, what would be a good problem to give him? What would be a really good problem to give him? A child. And not just a child, a little girl. Ballet slippers. The total antithesis of what he would think, this big, studly man, and he wants custody of the child, and da-da-da. And that's where the idea for friction came. So I built the story around the character. So that's an instance where the book came out of the character. And of course, have to throw in that love story, all the good stuff. And so I thought, who can the heroine be? And I thought, well, if he's fighting for custody, is she going to be a lawyer for the other side? Is she going to be? I thought, she'll be the judge. She'll be the one that stands between him and the thing he wants most, which is his daughter. And then, of course, they'll have this electric magnetic sexual attraction. Before you ask, years ago, when the Texas Book Festival in Austin is celebrating its 20th year this year, and Laura Bush, when she was First Lady of Texas, started the whole thing, and she invited me to be one of the speakers at the first one. And they put me, this is ridiculous, they put me in the House chamber. Now, y'all have all toured the state, you know it's this vast room, and it's got a podium, that even I can barely see over. And so there were, people grouped out there, and they said, speak for, 15 or 20 minutes, then open it up for questions. So I did, got to the question part, and I said, okay, anybody have a question? In the back of the room, this man standing up, his hand shoots into the air, and I go, that's trouble. So I started in front, you, kept working my way back, hoping we'd run out of time. I was still back there, like this. And so finally I said, okay, you in the back, what's your question? He said, yeah, I want to know, who inspires all those hot, sexy love scenes in your book? I said, well, my husband, which I had to say because the man in the back of the room was and he's been such a great sport about it for 35 years, but he doesn't get a copy until he goes out. Yesterday, he bought a copy of Friction. He doesn't get to read any of the books until he buys his own, but he'll be reading along, and you'll go, woo, this is good. We never did this. And I always, well, on page 75, there's a murder, and I haven't ever killed him yet. But anyway, he has a really good sport, and I credit him, as I told you from the beginning, for first of all daring me to do this, but moreover, he has enabled me to do it. He has been my staunchest ally, supporter. What can I do to make it easier? And so I owe him a debt of gratitude also. So, what do y'all want to talk about? Okay, oh no.